Hi everyone, I'm Kathryn True and I'm Earl True's daughter. I have met many of you, but I have not met all of you, and I'm just thinking about you. I miss visiting the Kenney. I miss spending time with my dad there and greeting people and talking to people there. So I thought one way I might be able to connect is by sharing uh, some books with you. So the first thing I'm going to do is share a couple of poems by Denise Levertov, and it's from her book Sands in the Well. The first one's called Creature to Creature. Almost too late to walk in the woods, but I did, anyway, and stepping aside for a moment from the shadowy path to enter darker shadow, a favorite circle of fir trees received a gift from the dusk. A small owl, not affrighted, merely moving deliberately to a branch a few feet further from me, looked full at me, a long regard, steady, acknowledging, unbiased. And this poem's called A Wren. Quiet among the leaves, a wren, fearless as if I were invisible, or moved with a silence like its own. From bush to bush it flies without hesitation, no flutter or whirring of wings. I feel myself lifted, lightened, dispersed. It has turned me to air. It can fly right through me. And I chose those poems because I'm going to read from a book called Rare Encounters with Ordinary Birds. And it is a book that a friend of mine, who actually lives in West Seattle, wrote. Her name is Lyanda Lynn Haupt. And I chose it because its subtitle is Notes from a Northwest Year. It's about her encounters with birds, and I know that when there was a presentation about birds last fall, a lot of you were interested, and this is one of my favorite books. It's really gives you insights into birds in new ways and provides new ways of thinking about them and how they make their lives. So I'll start out with the introduction and I'll read the first chapter. The introduction has a great photo of or drawing of a grosbeak. One day, when I was in 4th grade, my class took a field trip to the University of Washington's Arboretum. In a tree next to our walking trail, I saw a small gathering of autumn birds. "Look," I whispered to Mrs. Ray, our teacher, "evening grosbeaks." She gave me a strange look. "See," I pointed, "evening grosbeaks." Our family saw grosbeaks in our backyard at home all the time. A field guide to birds sat on the table by the sliding glass doors that led to a small patio surrounded by trees, mountain ash, maples, and Douglas firs. My younger sister and I would find the paintings in the book that matched the grosbeaks and other birds that frequented this miniature forest, try to tell the males from the females. Mrs. Ray queried our trip leader, one of the Arboretum's volunteer docents. "What are those birds?" "Oh, those are evening grosbeaks," the guide instructed, and over the rest of the students' giggles, grosbeak, we were 4th graders after all, she gave a little lesson explaining how the birds use their thick bills to eat seeds. "How did you know that?" Mrs. Ray squinted at me when we resumed walking, and I hardly knew what to say. How did she not know? I have always remembered that day, the day I discovered that it is not necessarily, quote, normal to know a bird's name. At home that evening, I watched the grosbeaks from a quiet haunt in the grass. With binoculars, I could see the gold on the male bird's flanks, which even in the shadowy dusk held a glow and looked terribly soft. Naturally, I did not know then that 20 years later, an evening grosbeak I was banding would bite my right index finger down to the bone, requiring a tetanus shot from a grumpy nurse. But back in the 4th grade, I had a strange sense, though I could not have expressed it at the time, that this bird was mine. The grosbeak and I had a solitary understanding, a relationship that when I left for school that morning had been ordinary, but now, I knew, was set apart. I watched and I watched. Birds will give you a window if you allow them. They will show you secrets from another world, fresh vision that, although avian, can accompany you home and alter your life. They will do this for you even if you don't know them by name, though such knowing is a thoughtful gesture. They will do this for you if you watch them. Chapter 1 is called First Bird, and it has a starling. There is a game birders play on New Year's Day called Bird of the Year. The very first bird you see on the first day of the new year is your theme bird for the next 365 days. It might seem a curious custom, but people who watch birds regularly are always contriving ways to keep themselves interested. This is one of those ways. You're given the possibility of creating something extraordinary. A year of the osprey, year of the pileated woodpecker, year of the trumpeter swan. This game is an inspiration to place yourself in natural circumstances that will yield a heavenly bird, blessing your year, your perspective, your imagination, your spirit. New year, first bird. This year, my first fresh little baby, just 4 weeks old, is tucked softly between my husband and me in bed early New Year's morning. I can hear them breathing, Tom and Claire. Annie the cat, Isabel the Australian shepherd, all asleep. As my baby's only food source, I am stuck to the snug winter cottage where she lies wrapped and dreaming in flannel. There will be, this New Year's Day, no sneaking off to find some fabulously promising birdish locale. I consider our cozy home in a suburb of Seattle. In spite of our proximity to the city, we see incredible birds here. Bald eagles, great blue herons, a Cooper's hawk one day, a band-tailed pigeon. Even the common birds we see every day have some fine avian qualities. The intelligence of the Steller's jay, the seeming cheerful industriousness of the black-capped chickadees, the limitless sociability of the bush tit. None of these would be too shabby as a theme bird for my first year of motherhood. I pull on Tom's robe, sneak quietly out the side door, and look up expectantly. In light of the dark shadow perched on our fence, I quickly decide to make up a few addenda to the Bird of the Year rules. The first bird you see after 7 a.m. is Bird of the Year. The first bird you see after your loved ones wake up. The first native bird. I am usually quite good at lying to myself, but even for me this would be just too blatant. Here before me sits a bird that ecologists refer to as sky rat. Year of the European starling it is. The starling was introduced to North America in the late 19th century by an acclimatization society hoping to populate the New World with every bird mentioned in the Shakespeare canon. This is one of those bird myths that's actually true. The society's leader, Eugene Schieffelin, possessed two passions, ornithology and Shakespeare. He combed the plays and sonnets, turning up a single unmemorable line in Part 1 of Henry IV. I'll have a starling shall be taught to speak nothing but Mortimer. This obscure and hapless mention was enough to fuel Schieffelin's resolve. First attempts to transport the starling failed, but in 1890, 100 birds survived travel by sea from Europe, were released in New York's Central Park, and established a small population. By 1940, there were few places in North America where the starling had not been observed. The Northwest was one of them. It's fascinating to read the entire literature on the bird life of this region. In Ralph Hoffman's 1927 account covering all Pacific Northwest birds, starlings are not even mentioned. It's an idyll in time that seems so far and impossible now, yet it has been only a matter of decades. Reports of winter starlings began to appear in Seattle in 1949, and the first locally observed rearing of young was recorded in 1962, 2 years before I was born. Now there are tens of thousands of starlings here. Autumn flocks blacken the evening skies, and even starling haters find their cloud-like movements astonishing, if not beautiful, as they swarm precisely in dusky arcs. The native breeding range of the European starling covers Europe, a good portion of Eurasia, the British Isles, and Scandinavia and the Middle East. The winter range stretches to North Africa. Besides North America, regions colonized in recent times by population expansion include South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and its surrounding islands, Jamaica, and parts of the West Indies. Even so, it is estimated that roughly 1/3 of the world population of European starlings reside here in North America. 200 million individual birds have sprung from the handful that were released in Central Park just a century ago. There's no doubt that the habitat changes wrought by European settlement and continuing today with relentless suburban sprawl have contributed to the starling's success in this country. While it may have been a fruitful colonizer in any case, it is doubtful that the increase in starling numbers and range would have been so vast without rapid landscape changes creating the sorts of expanses on which it thrives. Starlings love mown grass and grazed fields. the warm and sheltered roosts that human habitations offer. They avoid only a few types of landscape, mostly deep forests and deserts, the kinds of places that humans tend not to live. For the most part, the starling is an ecological disaster, competing aggressively and successfully with native birds for food and, more importantly, nest sites. It's believed that starlings have a detrimental effect on several of these species, particularly cavity nesting birds such as woodpeckers and bluebirds. They readily exploit disturbed habitats and varied food sources, advantages that overwhelm the few controls on their population: predation, disease, bad weather. Some birds and mammals, including accipiters, falcons, owls, weasels, rats, dogs, and cats, do manage to eat a few starlings, but none consider the starling a major food source, and it's doubtful that predation makes much of an impact on starling numbers. The ecological effects of the starling, though, are not quite so starkly cut. Starlings are known to eat cutworms, a horticultural menace. Some prominent ornithologists believe that the starling's impact on native birds is overstated. Rachel Carson penned an early essay in 1939 entitled, "How About Citizenship Papers for the Starling?" in which she suggested that starlings have such a positive agricultural impact that we should stop viewing them with suspicion and grant them official residency. Of course, this was 60 years ago, and there were not nearly so many starlings then. Because they're a non-native, invasive species, starlings are afforded no legal protection, making them accessible, abundant, and hassle-free research subjects. As such, starlings have contributed significantly to our understanding of avian migration strategies, flight mechanics, endocrine systems, and other aspects of basic bird biology. Starlings are also wildly intelligent and, at second glance, quite beautiful. The species' scientific name is Sturmus vulgaris. Vulgaris translates poorly. Some anti-starlingists feel the implications of the name suit the bird perfectly, but the Latin simply means common, not actually vulgar. Sturmus means starling, possibly from Latin sternae, star. The name might refer to the four-pointed silhouette of the starling in flight: bill, triangular wing tip, tail squared to a point, second wing, starling, little star. When starlings leave the nest as fledglings, they have mousy brown bodies, somewhat pale throats and breasts, and dark bills. By late September, all the birds are in their adult non-breeding plumage. Green-black wings are outlined in buffy orange. The black bellies and shoulders, spotted with pearl white, are... I missed something. By late September, all birds are in their adult non-breeding plumage. Green-black wings are outlined in buffy orange. The black bellies and shoulders spotted with pearl white, the head streaked with these lighter colors. They look quite fresh and stunning. Many bird species molt into a more colorful breeding plumage, but the starling's is acquired by wear. Pale feather colors are more susceptible to exposure, the effects of weather, light, and use. The white spots wear away and the orange wing outlines are trimmed, leaving an iridescent bird flecked with gold and jewel-toned in shimmering purple, green, and black. The bill turns bright yellow during the breeding season, and though the sexes look very much alike, you can amaze and impress your friends by telling them apart at close range with a secret birder's trick. The base of the female's pink is bill, the male's is blue. Yes, pink for girls, blue for boys. Starlings have unique, fun-to-watch foraging habits. While other birds look quite normal stepping about the yard, starlings walk with an exaggerated, vigorous gait, an actual waddle. A particularly plastic species, starlings will eat nearly anything. Their largely invertebrate diet is supplemented by berries, nuts, seeds, cat food, and garbage. Raising 3 chickens in my own backyard, I've learned that corn scratch is regarded highly by starlings, when my rather uppity hens designed to allow the smaller birds into their yard. In spite of the birds' eclectic diet, starling bodies seem particularly well adapted to invertebrate seeking. Compare them to robins, who also look for worms and insects in your backyard grasses. The starling bill is much pointier than a robin's and very sharp. Rather than picking exposed prey as robins do, starlings rigorously insert their bills into the ground. Then they use highly developed protractor muscles to open their mouths in the soil, creating a hole in which they can actually dig for little earth dwellers. Watching small flocks for long periods, you can learn to pick out particular birds by their individual variations on this basic foraging style. Some years ago, I worked on the East Coast as a raptor rehabilitator. Our center was established to treat and release injured birds of prey. But somehow, birds of all feathers wound up at our doorstep. Everything from a baby ruby-throated hummingbird to a Canada goose with a bad limp. It was house rule that we would not treat non-native pest species such as house sparrows, pigeons, and of course starlings. Time and resources were just too scarce. But what do you do when a knobby-kneed 8-year-old boy comes to you with an injured starling? His mother watches expectantly in the background as he strokes its back gently with one finger, looking extremely worried and sad, and asks you, near tears, "Can you take care of it?" Just what do you say? "Yeah, kid, I'll take care of that bird. Hand it over and I'll wring its scrawny neck." Here, a wider opportunity presents itself, one that transcends ecological and financial realities. Here is a child with an intact respect for life, and a rare opportunity to nurture that respect. Who among us does not still feel, in some small way, the mark made on our own quiet child heart by an injured bird that crossed our path? A Raptor Center renegade, I set up a little hospital for these ecological misfits in the corner of my room at home, nursing them back to reasonable health, then returning them to their young benefactors with instructions for final fattening up and release. It was under such circumstances that I came to raise my first baby starling. Biologist Bernd Heinrich writes, "If you seek contact with a wild bird that will bond, that will talk and even learn to sing tunes, and that will be practical to keep, I recommend adopting a starling." Mozart had one, and evidently he was extremely fond of it. I would have loved to discuss starling sentiments with Mozart, as I was utterly unprepared for the congenial, intelligent camaraderie offered by this little bird. Even after it was well fed, the juvenile starling, now completely feathered out, would run up and down the hall after me, wait impatiently outside the bathroom door for me, and read Proust over my shoulder. He would look me straight in the eye and talk for minutes at a time, imitating my intonation pattern. Mimicry has an important place in starling biology. Birds in the starling family were described in detail by Aristotle in ancient Greece, where they were taught to imitate human voices. Individual starlings are able to amass repertoires of more than 20 bird songs, as well as inanimate sounds such as jackhammers and, more recently, cell phones. Birds commonly mimicked include killdeer, robins, crows, gulls, and others, depending on the geographic wanderings of the particular starling. Instead of attempting to teach my small friend human words, I played tapes of my favorite bird songs over and over. Northwest voices that I missed during my tenure on the East Coast. Still a juvenile, the young starling learned to produce a convincing Wilson's warbler and a passing Swainson's thrush. I do not harbor any falsely poetic feelings about the presence of starlings or any blinders regarding their truly negative ecological impact. If I had a magic wand that would erase starlings from the face of North America, I would wave it now. But I certainly possess no such implement, and other less poetic means of starling eradication, poison traps, birth control, removal of roost sites, blaring loudspeakers, and guns, continue to fail miserably. E.O. Wilson wrote in Biophilia, his classic text on the innate human connection with the wider living earth, "Every species is a magic well, a window onto all others. As an urban dweller, I am forced to come to grips with the idea that I might turn to the starling as easily as any other species for lessons in living with and alongside birds and the natural world. I consider the unique landscape of the Pacific Northwest to be my wider home. But every day I live in an urban cottage, not an ancient forest, a coastal prairie, or a heavenly alpine meadow. Those places surround me. They are my authentic home, inhabited by the lives of astonishing birds. I like to think that in the widest sense, we are in the presence of all these birds always, but today we start where we are. I look back up at my bird of the year. Even in winter she is pretty, glinting with flecks of gold, iridescent black, purple, and green. Tom and Claire are up now, rustling about the coffee pot. I'm hopeful and amazed already by the coming year. The starling will remind me every day. All right, well, that was chapter 1 of Rare Encounters with Ordinary Birds. The next chapter is called An Invasion of Owls. So I will record that soon. And until then, I hope that you are all doing as well as you can. And just know that there's so many people out here thinking about you and missing you and looking forward to seeing you again in person. All right, take care. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.